Hello, my name is Kirstin and I'm a third-year PhD student at the History Department at York, studying informal social interactions and relationships in late medieval England. My thesis contributes to the field of medieval social history as it focuses on a fundamental basic aspect of social experiences, everyday informal social interactions and relationships, which has not been given due attention within previous scholarship. Previous work has considered socialising in communities in the Middle Ages, but this is generally focused on formal or institutional groups, such as guilds and fraternities, or groups based on occupation, poverty, or gender. It is important to study, however, less formalised social interactions too, as these made up the backbone of people's everyday experiences. I aim to move beyond previous research to concentrate on social connections which are more loosely defined, informal and often transitory, built up through quotidian face-to-face interactions, and which had a primarily social function. My main research questions are therefore concerned with: what forms of social interactions and activities did ordinary people participate in during the late medieval period? How were the informal relationships and groups constructed and maintained? And what work did they perform? Can we consider these groups as entities which had boundaries? And if so, how were these boundaries negotiated? And finally, as face-to-face interactions by necessity involve a level of proximity, I also ask how we can understand the relationship of neighbour in a later medieval context. The findings of this work can be drawn together in an in-depth case study of a 15th century monastic community at Barnard Abbey in Lincolnshire. Records for this religious house survive as testimonies given by the monks during several visitations by the bishop between 1438 and 1444. Although the monks were enclosed and part of an institutional group of brethren, these testimonies demonstrate the existence of informal relationships, both within the monastery and with the surrounding locality. Monks were found drinking together and defending each other in fights, playing dice together, as well as regularly visiting nearby taverns. These testimonies provide added depth to my research, as they survive over a number of years, and therefore the case study helps to consider the dynamic and changing elements of informal groups. In order to address my research questions, I'm using a wide range of sources. These include secular court records, such as complaints of nuisances, witness accounts of miracles, ecclesiastical court depositions involving marriage disputes and defamation cases, and coroners' reports of deaths. The very nature of informal socialising and social grouping means they are not always readily visible within much of the surviving source material. However, I have found these sources valuable as they often include incidental details about social interactions. All of these sources can be described as narrative texts, often including detailed descriptions of the context surrounding the event, dispute, or case in question. My method for studying these sources rests on the idea of a close reading of the narratives, crediting them as fictive but not necessarily untrue. Natalie Davis developed this method in her work on 16th century French remission letters, and Hayden White, moreover, argued narrative texts should be considered more in terms of their plausibility. Whilst the reality of events described cannot be assumed, they can be understood as situations that would have been feasible to contemporaries. For a witness testimony to stand up in court, for example, the account would have had to have been at least believable. Thus, they can provide us with a view of contemporary norms and expectations surrounding everyday interactions and informal relationships. I have included both urban and rural case studies in my research throughout the 14th and 15th centuries. This broad scope helps to balance the difficulties with studying an often elusive subject, and furthermore provides a wider understanding of the social environment for ordinary people during the later medieval period, in a way that could not be achieved with one source type. When people ask me about my research, I always find myself drawn to the accounts of one miracle in particular to illustrate what I study. The miracle is one of my earliest cases and involves the recovery of a little girl who drowned in a pond. The testimonies of 10 witnesses are recorded for the canonization, or the process of making someone a saint, of Thomas Cantilupe, Bishop of Hereford, which thankfully have been digitalized by the Vatican Library. For the rest of this talk, I will use this example to illustrate some of the questions that I am concerned with in this thesis. To give a brief overview, after parish mass one Sunday afternoon in April 1292, villagers Adam and Cecilia went to spend time in a nearby alehouse. Their 5-year-old daughter, Joan, followed them, but because there were other children there, her parents let her stay. She was playing in the garden there with her godmother's son, John, when she was accidentally pushed into a nearby pond and drowned. Later, some young dancers passed by the pond and, seeing the body there, assumed it was the child of Christina, a local poor woman, who she had drowned in her despair at her situation. The dancers, including John's father Thomas, decided to avoid an inquest by not reporting what they had found. Instead, they planned to remove the body under the cover of night. It was not until later, when John was able to find his mother, who was also called Joan, that the identity of the body was realised. Once Joan had been recovered from the pond by her godmother, it was reported that 40 bystanders at the alehouse gathered and prayed to Thomas Cantilupe for Joan's revival, some keeping vigil until midnight. Bystanders also showed concern for Joan's mother Cecilia, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, by persuading her to return home to a warm hearth. It was in this setting that Joan finally recovered. If we consider this miracle in terms of my research questions, the testimonies describing the witnesses' actions in the lead-up to the miracle indicate some of the ways the parishioners of Marden interacted together on an informal basis. Adam deposed that, once at the alehouse, quote, according to their manner and custom, the young people, after accepting a drink, had arranged themselves in a dance. Meanwhile, Cecilia and Joan's godmother and namesake did not initially listen to John telling them that Joan had fallen into the pond, because, quote, they were childish words, and then Ralph Taylor of the same village was recounting certain words of comfort to the two women, so they did not pay attention to the words of John. The residents then took part in dancing, drinking, and chatting together during their free time on a Sunday afternoon. These interactions helped foster ties between participants, which were consolidated further through acts of support. When Joan was recovered from the pond, everyone at the alehouse gathered around, offering support and aid to Adam and Cecilia. Witnesses recounted how it was Nicholas, son of Gilbert of Marden, who raised her upside down to drain away the water. Additionally, the bystanders remained, quote, next to the pond from sunset until the darkness of the night, persevering in prayer for the child. In their testimonies, Cecilia and Adam described the people at the alehouse as their neighbours. Adam was not present when Joan was found because he stated that he was, quote, in the alehouse engaged with his neighbours. The witnesses' subsequent actions, therefore, also have implications for how we understand medieval neighbourly relationships. The descriptions offer an evocative account of the villagers providing Joan's parents emotional and spiritual support during a time of crisis, though we should also be wary of the purpose of these narratives. Recounting the high number of bystanders praying simultaneously demonstrated the popularity of St. Thomas's cult, provided witnesses to verify the miracle, and highlighted the seriousness of the situation. Despite the narrative attempts to illustrate the parishioners of Marden as an ideal community, the testimonies also reveal the boundaries of the social group that the residents had constructed. This is most visible in the dancers' inaction when they misidentified the body in the pond, believing it was the daughter of a poor woman. Christina was clearly not a stranger to the locality. She was described as of the parish, and they knew her name. The dancers clearly knew enough about her situation and well-being, or lack thereof, to come to the conclusion that she had drowned her own daughter. While bystanders worried that Cecilia would come to harm if she was not brought home to a warm hearth, there was no attempt to find Christina. Through their reported actions, therefore, the villagers and dancers included Joan and her family with support, prayers and vigil, whilst at the same time excluding Christina and her daughter. As I hope this example has demonstrated, narrative accounts recorded in various forms in the later medieval period provide an invaluable window into everyday social interactions. The completion of my research will help fill the gap in our understanding of informal quotidian social experiences during this period, which is fundamental to a better appreciation of relationships more broadly. This work, furthermore, will impact our understanding of group mentalities and self-identifications in other historical and cultural contexts besides medieval England. Thank you.